All right, welcome. It's Romeo here from Helping People Create, and today we're talking about PA equipment for live music events. If this isn't of interest to you, you can click away now, but if it is of interest to you, this video is going to take you through the various pieces of equipment that you need and a very whistle-stop tour of how to set it up. But predominantly it's focused on the equipment. So we're taking this from UK Open Mic. UK Open Mic are the UK's biggest provider of live music events, acoustic music events to small venues like pubs, and it's another business that I'm involved with. And so we're going to use their setup, their general setup, to go through this. So let's get straight into it, or not. Yes, here we go. PA equipment list. There's a few things you're going to need. PA speakers. So we're going to go through each of these individually afterwards, but 2 times PA speakers and 2 times speaker stands, 2 times speaker power cables, in the UK also known as kettle leads, a particular type of speaker cable, power cable, 2 speaker cables, typically about 10 meters long, XLR cables, but it does depend on the speaker input and the mixing desk output connectors. Again, we're going to go into that. So this is just the quick overview. 1 live music mixing desk, so it must be able to take instrument and mic cables, so not DJ mixing desks, etc. So these being a couple of the most important elements, here's a couple that we might use. The Eurolive B210D from Behringer, same thing for the QX1204 USB for the mixing desk. So there's a couple of examples for you, but you can use any equipment as long as it kind of does this, if that makes sense. So we'll get to it. A PSU, a power supply unit for the mixing desk. So it might be unique to the desk, but it might also be a kettle lead. Again, it depends on the desk model. 3 XLR cables, 6 meters, male to female would be ideal for the microphones. Generally, if you can, get different colors, because when you need to adjust cables and they're all the same color and you don't know which one you're dealing with, it's much easier when you can just look at the performer and look at what color is plugged into their instrument or what color they're singing into the mic and go, I'll just adjust that color. 3 dynamic microphones. We've got 3 XLR cables for the mics in step 7. So step 8, let's get 3 microphones with standard mic clips, because we need to be able to clip them onto the mic stands. The Shure SM58s are the industry gold standard. You will find them from the smallest little pub venue up to the biggest concert venue. They are just tried and tested, but they are pretty expensive. So other lower quality mics will suffice if you don't mind sacrificing quality at your event. 3 boom mic stands with standard mic clips if the mics don't come with them. So these are the stands to hold your microphones, and the clips are the things that will clip your microphones to the stands. 3 instrument cables. Again, 6 meters is a general good rule of thumb. You may need longer than 6 meters. I wouldn't go any less than 6 meters, but 6 meters usually will work. Jack to jack. So these are kind of for guitars or keyboards, but mostly it's going to be guitars, maybe bass guitars. And again, ideally for different colors, so that it's easier for you to work out what volume you're turning up or down or what have you. 2 times aux leads. Typically these are 2 to 3 meters, and they're dual 6.35 millimeter male jacks to single stereo 3.5 millimeter male. What that basically means is it must allow plugging a phone, headphone, or a mobile device headphone socket into the mixing desk and have that come out in stereo. So basically, if you want to play backing music from your phone and your phone's got a normal headphone jack, then bingo, this is what you need. 2 lightning adapters. These are for connecting a 3.5 millimeter headphone jack to an Apple device. So again, Apple devices don't have normal headphone jacks. A lot of, or some rather, Android devices will use the USB-C instead of a headphone jack. So again, you might need a USB-C adapter, though that's really rather rare. So the lightning adapters. And finally, a 5 to 10 meter 4-gang surge protected power extension cable. So this is just so that you can plug in the speakers, the mixing desk, etc. if they need to be plugged in and they're going to be far away from a power source, which is often the case. So again, you need a cable that fits the the need that you have. So let's go into the individual bits of equipment. Okay, so these are the PA speakers. So this is the front of a typical PA speaker, this is the back of a typical PA speaker, and this is a zoom in of this section here. So a few things to note. speakers come in two types generally, passive and active. Active means that they have their own amplifier on board, and therefore you don't need a separate amplifier to power the speakers. Passive means basically they do. Generally speaking, most or a lot of modern speakers will just be active ones because it's a lot easier, and you can generally tell because they're going to have a socket here for a power. So what we've got here is we've got the power socket here, which is a typical what we would call kettle lead. It does have a technical name, no one can remember it, so you just call it a kettle lead. It's got inputs for your speakers. This is your kind of typical jack input, and this is a typical XLR input. And obviously this is female because it's got the holes, so we're going to need a male cable to plug into that one. This is if you want to link multiple speakers together, but generally speaking we don't need to worry about that. They will have their own volume or level rather on the back, and they'll have a bit of an EQ most likely. Different speakers will have different settings on the back, but what you're looking for particularly is the input. What cables do you need to bring the signal to the speakers? So we've got, as I say, a male jack, or we can use a male XLR. So if we go on to the next thing, speaker stands. These are pretty standard. You can get them from loads of different places, loads of different brands. Some will come with bags, which can be very handy. Some won't, most won't. Again, you want something sturdy. You don't want it to be too narrow when it's opened up. These are obviously sort of slightly folded up, but they're tripod stands. And you also want them to be able to extend to a decent height so that you can put the speakers up. So these are going to be standard. I think it's 35mm sort of diameter, and they'll just, you can see here ish, they'll go into the bottom of most speakers. So again, you want to check that your PA speakers are going to take normal sort of 35mm industry standard speaker stands, and then make sure your speaker stands are industry standard as well. Simples. So the speaker power cables, as we said, this is what the typical kettle lead would look like. And you can see here we've got a female end here, which will go into the male pins here on the back of the speaker. And this is a standard British plug. So that'll plug into a wall socket or a power extension or whatever you need. Speaker power, sorry, it shouldn't be power cables, just be speaker cables. I'll change that later. So speaker cables. Once again, we've got the jack here, which we know, so we can use a male jack to plug in here. But if we've got an XLR, and we need a male XLR if it's only got a female XLR here, and this is a male XLR, this part here, you can see the pins there rather than the female end. You may, again, it all depends on the mixing desk, you may have a mixing desk that outputs needing a male jack, and you might have a speaker that inputs needing a male XLR. So you might have one end of your cable with this on and one end of your cable with this on, or you might have, as in this case, both ends are male jacks, or here both ends might be the one end might be a male XLR, the other end a female XLR. Usually speaking, for XLR outputs on mixing desks, which we'll come to, they'll usually have the need the female cable to plug in and the male to plug into the speaker. So typically, again, we want about 10-meter speaker cables because, again, you want to be able to have width. If you've got stereo speakers, you don't know, one of them might be closer to the mixing desk, one might be further. But if you have two different length XLR cables, for example, one of them's 3 meters and one of them's 20 meters, then the sound is going to be ever so slightly delayed going to one of the speakers if you're running in stereo, which probably won't be too noticeable but might make a difference. So generally speaking, regardless of how close your mixing desk is to your left speaker or your right speaker, you're going to want your speaker cables to be the same length. So mixing desk, we've got a few parts to the mixing desk because this is the control center. This is almost the most important piece of gear. So this is an overview of a typical mixing desk. Now this one has 4 kind of XLR channels here, which would be used for microphones, but they've also got the jack cables, so you can use a jack input, again male XLR or male jack, and these channels are exactly the same. They just are numbers 1, 2, 3 and 4. We do have more channels on this desk, which we're going to come to in a minute, but they all function basically the same. Over here we've got our our main output, the volume faders here. So we've got our faders here. We're going to go through all this channel in a second, and we've got our output here. The other thing is this section, which gives us our output cables and some extra input options. And here we've got our effects area. So generally speaking, when you're working with audio, live music audio, and you're working with singers, they're going to want some effects on their vocal. So when you have effects on vocals, it's called wet. And when you have no effects on vocals, it's called dry. Wet and dry. So generally singers are going to want wet effects on their vocals, and those effects are usually going to be reverbs, delays, or a combination thereof. And it's again adjust to taste, but what you really ideally want is your mixing desk to have the ability to add effects onto the channels. Whereas, for example, some instruments you're going to want them dry because you don't want too much reverb on. For example, let's say someone comes with an electric guitar, they've already got their effects, they're not going to want extra effects on their already affected guitar, so you're going to want to be able to turn them off, but you still want to have them on for the vocals. So let's go to the next section. This bit here is, we're now going to go section by section along channel 1 here. Okay, so what we've got here is the XLR input, so that's where we put a microphone in, for example, or we've got a male line in output, so for the jack where we might plug in an instrument. Could be a microphone as well, but generally it's going to be an instrument and like a guitar or something like that. This here is a USB for wireless microphones. You'd plug in the USB here and you'd have a USB going into your microphone, and the microphone USB would broadcast to the receiver USB, which would be plugged in here. But for the purposes of this, it doesn't really make a difference whether it's XLR, jack input, or a USB. We've still got the same thing. A lot of mixing desks will have this button, a low cut button. All that does is it removes very low end, bass end audio. The reason for that is, let's say you've got a microphone, it's clipped onto a microphone stand, and the microphone stand is sitting on a floor, as they always do. If there's a lot of rumble on the, like in the venue, might be for a drum kit or something like that, those vibrations are low level vibrations, bass vibrations, low frequency I should say, and they'll come up through the mic stand, vibrate through the mic stand and vibrate into the microphone, so the microphone will pick them up and it will transmit them into the mixing desk. So the low cut button is designed to kind of remove that, what they'd call stage rumble. So it just cleans up the signal. So it's good on a microphone, but you might not use it depending on the instrument you've got plugged in. But for microphones, it's usually a good idea to have that on. Next, you've got the gain. The gain is turning up basically the power of the signal coming from the microphone. So dynamic microphones, which are the ones you'd use in live music, they need turning up a certain amount depending on how strong the signal is going into the microphone. And this is where you're going to turn it up and you're going to get some feedback when it's turned up too loud, and then you're going to dial it back a little. So this is the first port of call to bring the microphone signal or the instrument signal up to a decent level. Then the next section here, some mixing desks have this, which is a compressor. This is a very simple one. It goes from 0 to 10, and without going too technical, you don't really need to know. You just dial it up. If it sounds good, it sounds good. If it doesn't, it doesn't. What a compressor does is it kind of smooths out any volume fluctuations in the input signal. What that basically means is if I'm singing a bit quietly or I'm singing really loud, it will make the loud parts quieter and it'll make the quieter parts louder, so that it's a smoother signal. Then we've got our EQ section. EQ standing for equalization. So with all sound, it is on a spectrum going from really low frequencies, think really low bassy sounds, up to really high frequencies, think really tinny sharp sounds that pierce your eardrums. So we have on this particular desk 3-band EQ, meaning we can adjust the low EQ, the mid EQ and the high EQ. So generally speaking, you're going to set all of these to 0 whenever you plug anything in. You're also going to take your gain down to 0. And then you're going to bring your gain up, and then you'll adjust these to taste. So depending on the room acoustics, depending on how many people are in the venue, depending on how the vocalist or the instrument is sounding, you might need to bring up or down some of these EQ Generally speaking, first you want to lower some EQs rather than boost the EQ. So sometimes if you want a bit more clarity in the top end, you might actually just want to remove some mid or low. That might clear it up. Sometimes you just need to boost one of them or what have you. So again, you adjust that to taste. Here we've got the auxiliary. We're not really going to go into this too much, but this sends the signal to another channel basically, so you can do some other stuff with it. This, however, we do want, this is our FX. We talked earlier about the reverb having a wet signal or delay, etc. This is going to turn up the signal from this channel to the effects. So if you don't want any effects on this channel, you turn it down. If you want more effects on this channel, you keep turning it up. And again, you do it to taste. Next on this channel, below that, we have the pan. So we've got left and right. We want it set in the center generally. If we've got two speakers, it's stereo. We generally want it in the center. But again, it depends on where we want to pan it in the mix. If we've got loads of people singing or loads of instruments, we might put one guitar on the left, one guitar on the right, and the vocalist in the center. Again, use it to taste. This one has a mute button, super helpful. You press this button and it mutes all the signal coming out of that channel. So anytime that you are going to adjust, you're going to take out an instrument or plug in a new instrument or what have you, it's good to mute the channel. It's also good to turn down the volume fader and also turn down the gain, because that way when you unmute the channel, you're not going to get any mad feedback or anything like that, and then you can bring it up. Generally speaking, here's your volume fader. Ideally, you want your faders for this middle bit to be at 0. That's really where you want that fader to sit. So you'd use the gain to adjust, to bring it up, and you'd use the fader for sort of fine tuning a little bit. But again, it depends on the audio source. It depends on how much feedback or hiss is coming from the signal. So you might have the gain turned down because there's lots of hiss coming in through the microphone, and then you'd use your fader to bring it up. Again, different scenarios are going to mean different things. And here, this is a solo button. This just means it's the opposite of mute. Instead of muting this channel, it will have only the signal coming from this channel or any other channels that you've pressed solo on. So if you just want to double check just this channel, you'd press that. So this is a bit of a long explanation onto the technical side of it, but it's important to understand the signal flow. Your input signal comes into here via one of these 3 inputs, and then you adjust the gain, you adjust the EQ, you adjust the FX, you adjust the panning, and then you adjust the volume at the end. And then the signal comes out of this channel and gets fed into the output of the desk, which is the master, generally going to be the main mix, the master volume. And the main mix here, left and right channels, is going to send it to the speakers, the left and the right speakers if you're running stereo. So this is just the top of the desk. We obviously know now what each of these channels do. We're not going to go through that. What we are going to quickly touch upon is, let's say we're going to plug in a phone to play backing music. That phone, as we mentioned earlier, has the headphone out going into a dual mono input. So we put the left side of the mono in here and the right side in here. And now this channel 5 and 6 would be the volume channel for your backing music. Nice and simple. We can take the signal out and record it via into a 2-track tape machine or something else, a mini disc player or whatever you might want. This here will take the signal out and you can do something else with it. Again, we've got stereo aux returns. If we were going to use the aux send here, then that's where it would come out of, and then it will go back in. That's if you want to process the signal using external effects or whatever. Again, we're not going to go into that now. We've got phones here if you're going to plug in some headphones to listen to what's going out, and here are just the various different selections for the effects. So reverb, here we can see we've got reverb A, reverb B, blah blah blah, and there's combination effects. Look in the instruction manuals to see what all of that is. And then finally, we've got the back of the mixing desk. For the back of this mixing desk, we've got the power input. We can see again, this is a kettle lead, and we can turn the power on and on. We've got phantom power. You don't need to worry about that in a live setting. Generally, this just means, is the mixing desk sending power to the microphone? So some microphones need to be powered by what's called phantom power. Generally, this is going to be off, because if you're doing a live situation, the microphones that need phantom power are far too sensitive for live situations. Then we have the main outputs. This is super important. This is what's going to the speaker. We can see here we've got the male XLR pin, so we need a female XLR to plug in here, and then the other end of that cable will be a male XLR, and that will plug into the female XLR input on the speakers. We also have an alternate output, so we can run, for example, a second set of speakers which might be stage monitors. Those are the smaller or fold-back speakers that are often on a stage in bigger venues, and those speakers are pointing at the performers, and they're to give the performers so that they can hear their own sound better. For small venues, you're generally not going to have monitors, so you're generally not going to use these. If you were going to use them, they're going to be in your output here. So, you know, your left and right here, or what have you. But we're not going to use them. Is it there? Or is it down on the desk? On this desk. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So we can use those. And again, the control room is if you've got a separate room where you're listening, and that's would send a signal there. We don't need to worry about that. Phew, we got through that. So the mixing desk PSU, now we're going to be able to steam through the rest of it. The mixing desk PSU, power supply unit, as we noticed on the last desk, it was a kettle lead, but on some desks, particularly older desks, they have their own mixing desk. They have their own proprietary input, and this is an example. This little cable here would plug into there. So it's very important to know, does the mixing desk take power like a standard kettle lead, or does it have its own particular PSU? If it has its own PSU, I suggest that you get at least a backup PSU, because if this breaks, you can't use your desk. And for a lot of these older ones, they don't do them anymore, and if that breaks, it might cost you a lot of money to find one person who's got one of these or get it repaired. So generally speaking, you want one that takes a kettle lead. It's just easier. But if you do have a PSU that's proprietary to the particular mixing desk, make sure you buy some spares. So now we get to the XLR cables. These are also known as mic cables. Also, they can be used as speaker leads. So for the microphones, you want a 6 meter male to female. Here's the male end, here's the female end. The female end is going to plug into the male input on the microphone. The male part is going to plug into the female input on the mixing desk, which we've gone through. Ideally, you want them to be different colors, because again, if you've got 5, 6, 7 cables plugged into a mixing desk, it's much nicer if they're all different colors, so then you know much more quickly what you need to adjust. This is the microphone. This is a Shure SM58. This one has a rocker switch to turn it off and on, to mute it effectively. Most, especially the older ones, don't have that. It's not a problem if they don't have it. It's just very convenient if your dynamic microphone does have a on-off switch. And we can see here it's got a male XLR input, so we need to put a female XLR input into it. You'll notice here we've also got standard mic clips. So a standard mic clip will like screw onto the top of a mic stand. It should also come with an adapter, because different mic stands might have different sized threads to screw onto. So hopefully your microphones will come with their own mic clips, which will hold them securely and have an adapter. If they don't, hopefully your mic stands will come with mic clips or mic adapters. So this is a boom mic stand. So a couple of things to be aware of. It's boom because it's not straight up and that's it. It's got this arm coming across the top here. That's called the boom arm. That makes a difference between a boom mic stand and just a straight up mic stand. The reason you want a boom is because if a performer is playing a guitar, they need to have space for their instrument to stand here. If it's just straight up here, they're not going to have space to be able to sing very comfortably at all. So you can't really see in this picture, but here there would be a little thread and you'd thread that on, you'd thread that, screw that on, and then that would hold your mic stand. A couple of things to be aware of. Again, you want ideally a good quality mic stand. You want the legs on the tripod to be wide enough that the stand doesn't topple over when you put it up to a decent height. Again, with a boom stand, you've got this extra bit you can make more height, because you can adjust this up or down. So you can make it taller just by adjusting the boom. But again, you want a mic stand that's going to be able to deal with people who are, you know, a couple of meters tall or even taller if needs be, but also be able to adjust it very quickly for shorter people. So this would be a little twisty thing that would allow you to quickly adjust the height, a quick lock I think they call it, to adjust the height of the stand for somebody who's a bit smaller or somebody who's a bit taller. So pretty simple stuff, and again, decent quality if you can get it, rather than plastic, because they won't last and, you know, they'll just be rubbish. Now the instrument cables, these are for plugging into instruments like guitars or keyboards. Again, they're jack to jack, which is these cables, these connectors here, 6 meters long. Ideally, maybe you need them longer. And again, ideally different colors. One thing to note, this one's got a right angle end. They don't have to have a right angle end. They could have two ends just like this. The right angle is often a bit more convenient for plugging into guitars than the straight angle. However, there are some guitars, Fender electric guitars particularly, that will probably want straighter ones, but for most acoustic guitars, pretty much all acoustic guitars, the right angle is going to make life a little bit easier, but it doesn't really matter. And we're nearly at the end now. Instrument cables, that shouldn't say instrument cables at all, that should say aux leads, don't worry about that. So we couple of aux leads, typically 2 to 3 meters. Again, dual mono 6.35, so these ones, which are basically like jack leads. Male jacks to single stereo, which is this 3.5. So again, this plugs into your mobile device like your phone, headphone jack, and this plugs into the mixing desk, left channel, right channel, so that you can get a stereo out of your device. And you can see that this has got 2 bands there, which is stereo. This has got 1 band, so that's how you know it's mono. If this was a stereo cable, it would have 2 bands there, and then you wouldn't need 2 sides because it would be stereo. However, generally speaking, you want a left and right plug into your mixing desk. And I think finally, no, penultimate one, lightning adapters. For all those lovely Apple users out there, Apple devices don't have headphone jacks, so you need this adapter here. This is the lightning end, plugs into the Apple device. This is a headphone socket, so you plug your headphone in. Nice and simple, and pretty self-explanatory. And finally, a power extension lead, again 5 to 10 meters depending on how far away your power source is. 4 gang, meaning 4 plugs, because you have speaker, mixing desk potentially, and then you've got a spare one for a charger or whatever you want. It's useful to have individually individual switches so you can turn stuff off and on. And again, you ideally want it surge protected and short circuit protected and all of that, fire hazard protected, so that if there's ever a problem with the power, you don't fry all of your equipment. And that is all of the equipment. Now the last thing is just a quick recap, the reminder of the mixing desk. So now that we know what all the cables are, the microphones will plug into the XLR, the mic cables, and they'll plug into here on your mixing desk. The instruments will plug into the instrument jack cables, and they will plug into here on your mixing desk. Or, you'd have the mics in one channel, then the guitar in the next channel, maybe another mic in that channel, a guitar in that channel. You only ever have one instrument or mic going into a channel, so only ever plug into one of these per channel. Then you've got the aux lead, which will plug into your left and right here, so you can have backing music. You want 2 aux leads because you want one for any performers who are going to be playing, and the second channel, plug in another device to play backing music in between, background music in between performers, because what you never really want is silence. So somebody finishes, as soon as they finish, you turn down their performance, their input here or what have you, but you'd also turn up the backing music, so it's an immediate transition. But you still want to have a spare channel for backing tracks for a performer if they need, so you don't have to turn off your own backing music while you put them on. And obviously the speakers were coming out of the speaker outs back here, which we talked about earlier, and plugging into your speakers. So thank you very much. I'm sorry that was very long, but hopefully now you understand what all the pieces of gear used for in a typical live music mixing, live music environment, the mixing desk, the speakers, all of the cables, etc. And you'll be able to set up your own event or run a UK Open Mic event if you're running one of our events. Thank you very much. Enjoy yourselves. Bye.